Hello, friends. This is Darrell Mobley, and welcome to my interview with experts. I am thrilled today to be able to have this interview with experts with Dr. Sian Beilock. She's one of the leading experts on brain science and the many factors that influence all types of performance. As you know, I'm a life and executive coach, and I spend my time assisting my clients, my coaching clients, to achieve their highest possibilities, to live at the very height of their being, to look forward and realize that the journey they're on will take them where they want to go with no regrets, personally and professionally. I coach all types of folks. I coach parents, I coach couples, I coach athletes, professional in college, I coach professional coaches, college coaches, politicians, entrepreneurs, leading executives, small business folks starting, academics, everything. And I'm telling you that what I'm going to talk to you about today, what you're going to hear me discuss with Dr. Beilock today, can impact you and lead you to a higher possibility. Very quickly, Dr. Beilock got a BS in cognitive science from the University of California, San Diego. She's got PhDs in both kinesiology and psychology from Michigan State University. Listen, here's the deal. She has discovered how and why some people succeed and do great things on the brightest stage when the times require it, and why some don't. And what I love about that, it's in her book. The book is Choke, What the Secrets of the Brain Reveal About Getting It Right When You Have to. You can find it on any bookstore, anywhere. It's a fantastic, fascinating book into the mind. You know, I tell my clients, and I end my radio shows always by saying, believe, think, act, win. Well, this book, Choke, provides the structure behind my command to believe, to think, to act, and to win. Because as you believe and as you think, that leads to your outcome. And you're going to hear from Dr. Beilock here shortly that for some folks, their belief structure, their thinking leads them to underperform when it matters most. And this is in everything, both with your kids, your relationship with your spouse or significant other, your bosses, just generally your career, anytime giving a speech. I give talks all the time. I give speeches around the world, at workshops. I work with clients all the time. And I must tell you, I have no concerns, no issues, no challenges thinking that I can't do that. And now, after reading Dr. Beilock's book, after talking with her, I understand why I tend to perform well in those situations. And it can be true for all of us. So I wanted you to hear this from Dr. Beilock and use the knowledge in your own life to live at your highest possibility. Listen up now. Sit forward, get your pencil and paper out, and enjoy my interview with Dr. Sian Beilock. The book, Choke. First of all, Dr. Beilock, I spend my time helping folks get from point A to point B. Point B being greater performance, greater outcome, a more desirable outcome perhaps, reaching their goals. And this is in the sports, academics, business, regarding those promotions, presentations, speakers, authors, just all students, everything. And let me just start off by asking you, what have you discovered about people who aspire to perform well when the lights are brightest, when the stakes are highest? What have you discovered about those who tend to perform at their top and those who tend to fall somewhat short?
Right, that's a great question, right? Why do some people perform really well when the stakes are high and others seem to not be able to show what they know?
Yes.
And one of the big things that I talk about in my book, and that really a lot of psychological and brain science research suggests, is that it's not that people are innately born or gifted with this ability to excel under stress. It's that people learn how to perform well under pressure. They learn how to show what they know. They learn techniques, specific ways that they can get their best performance out when it counts. And so I don't believe that there's one type of person that's prone to excel. I believe there's lots of things we can do to get everyone to perform well when they need it most.
Mm-hmm. And so, the good news is they're not born like that. That means I love that. And I presume there are techniques. Now, I know folks, and let me stop and say that the book that that really turned me on to you and what you're all about is a provocative title, Choke, What the Secrets of the Brain Reveal About Getting It Right When You Have to. So I want to make sure that everyone here's a nod. What I love about it is it gives you specific things to do as opposed to just being something that, if I can be quite honest, Dr. Beilock, the typical academic rights where there's not actionable.
Yeah.
So,
I understand.
But it's so okay. All right, I'm going to go through some examples, and I want to you hit me over the head with this. There are students who, I went to West Point, it's where I attended school, and there were some folks there who, one might say, outperformed, they may have studied, say, compared to the average, or they may have studied the average amount there, but their performance in the test, in a high stress test, outperformed those of others who studied relentlessly, were great students, really engaged, and I never understood why that was so, other than the fact that I could say, well, somebody's relaxed. I assume it's not that simple. Why did the person who appeared to not prepare as much achieve more on a test than the person who prepared, tremendously?
Right, and there's a variety of reasons we perform poorly in stressful situations. One thing that happens, for example, is that people who tend to bomb the test often start worrying when they're in the stressful situation. They worry about the consequences, they worry about the outcome, and this distracts the limited attention resources they have to focus on the test. So we only have a limited ability to think and reason on the fly. I think anyone can attest to this as they try and, for example, drive and talk on the cell phone or drive and deal with screaming kids. There's only so much you can do at a time. And when you're in a stressful situation and your mind is occupied with worries about the consequences, thinking about whether your racing heart really means that you're about to bomb this test, you often tend to have this self-fulfilling prophecy. You just don't have as much, I talk about it as cognitive horsepower, your ability to reason and attend to information when you need it. And so students who tend to perform well in those situations, we've found, use a variety of techniques, have a toolbox for managing the stress they feel. And because they perform well in these situations, when they get to another situation, they often don't feel as much stress as the person sitting next to them. So one big predictor of whether people are going to perform well in stressful situations or perform poorly is how they think about their abilities. So if you walk into a test and you think about the fact that you're prepared and you're positive about the outcome, then you're less likely to focus on negative consequences, you're less likely to be distracted, you're more likely to excel. But if you walk into that test thinking that your racing heart, everything that's going on is indicative of this idea that you really don't have what it takes to succeed, there's a high likelihood that you in fact won't succeed. Mindset seems like a small thing, but we actually have evidence from looking inside the brain that whether or not you're thinking positively about something or negatively changes the brain regions and the support you get to show what you know.
Wow. Now, wait, when you say look inside the brain, talk a little bit more about how do you do that?
So in the book, I talk a lot about modern neuroscience techniques, which has really changed how we think about human performance in the last few decades. And that's why I felt it was really important to write this book now, because we now know a lot more about what happens in people's brains when they're performing well under stress and when they perform poorly. And to look inside the brain, we use a technique, an imaging technique called functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI. And essentially it allows us to go in and look at what parts of the brain are most active, are working the hardest when people perform particular tasks. And from looking at brain function as people do a math problem or think about going into a stressful situation, we can get some ideas about what happens when people are really nervous, when people become anxious and perform poorly, versus what happens when people are in the same stressful situation and they ace the test.
Now, God, that's fantastic, incredible. Now, let me take it back to I want to go off in that direction. Let me take it back. If I understand correctly, my research into you, your thrust into this area of study began way back when was it soccer or lacrosse? You were evaluating your performance. Is that right?
Yeah, I was an athlete growing up. I played in the Olympic development program in soccer, and in college I played lacrosse. And I was also interested in doing well not only on the athletic field but also in the classroom. And I noticed there were a lot of parallels between the types of pressures I felt when I was sitting for the SAT and the types of pressures I felt when I was standing up to try and hit the game-winning shot. And I wanted to understand what happened in the brain, in the body, that might explain why sometimes I aced those tests and sometimes I just couldn't pull out my best performance.
You are listening to Interview with Experts from SuccessMojo.com. My goodness, and it's your contention, and I know that it is, but I want you to say it, that a person who has heretofore maybe flubbed, I think that's the word you use, flubbed their performance when the lights were brightest, that they can learn, as you mentioned the toolbox, they can learn techniques that will allow them to up their performance level when it really counts. Is that?
That is my contention. It comes from a lot of scientific research, and I think we have really good evidence that if we can understand the science behind why people choke, why people perform more poorly than expected in those situations where they feel stressed, where they feel pressure to perform well, then we can figure out the best ways to inoculate folks. Okay. So in the book, I talk about several techniques that are simple techniques, but based on what we know about brain science. So just to give you an example, in the book I talk about a study with Canadian Olympic swimmers. So these are swimmers who either made the Olympic team and just swam poorly at the Olympics. We know how swimmers have swam in the past because there's race time, so we can tell. Or just failed to make the Olympic team when they should have. And researchers did a study with these swimmers where they put them in an fMRI machine, so this is a machine that looks at brain activity, and had them watch videos of their failed races. And what they showed is that when these athletes watched these videos of the failed races, areas of the brain that are really important for negative emotions and ruminations were very active. They were doing a lot of work. These athletes were having a negative emotional reaction. Mm-hmm. And the areas of the brain that were important for getting up on the starting block and going, those important sensory and motor areas, seemed to be less active than they should be. But then they did an activity that actually got the athletes to think positively, to rather than just focus on the negative aspects of their failed race, to actually think about what they could learn from that race, how they could turn it around and perform better in the end. And then they scanned their brains again. So now all they've done is just shifted the athletes' mindsets a little bit in terms of how they were thinking. And what they showed is when they scanned the athletes' brains again while they watched these videos, now all of a sudden these negative emotion areas weren't so involved. Rather, they looked like they're having activity in a lot of areas that we know are really important for motivation and for getting up and going and trying your hardest on that next race or that next test. And so it suggests, research like this suggests that very small techniques can be used to really change how the brain and body are geared up and ready for the performance that comes up.
Well, let me give the book title again. Choke, CHOKE, What the Secrets of the Brain Reveal About Getting It Right When You Have to, written by my guest, Dr. Sian Beilock. Let me personalize it. Let's say I'm one of my coaching clients. I'm one of the folks listening here on the radio. I'm listening to his talks, and how can I use this now? Somebody comes to me and says, Daryl, I want to move up the corporate ladder. I'm at the general manager level. I want to become a senior VP one day or the CEO or what have you. And let's say they've blocked themselves from performing at their best to make that ascent so far. Do you deal with that kind of challenge?
Yeah, so when you want to move up the ladder, those one snippets of performance become very important, whether it's finding yourself in the elevator with your boss and only having a couple minutes to impress him or her, or giving an important presentation, or just coming off well in a business meeting or a lunch. And these sorts of situations can be really stressful for people because they know a lot is on the line. And so in the book, I give lots of tips for how to deal with those situations. So, for example, because people anticipate and worry about what's going on, and we know these worries really co-opt important brain resources, we've done studies to show that actually having people write for just 10 minutes about their worries about an upcoming event, whether it's a public speaking situation or you're pitching to a client or you're just going to be meeting your boss for coffee, for example, writing for 10 minutes about your worries essentially empties those worries from mind such that you're freer, you have more brain power when you get into the stressful situation. And you might actually think that this seems very counterintuitive because because if you're writing about your worries, maybe you're focusing on them more. But the key is that if you do this ahead of time, if you can put those worries on paper, they're just less likely to pop up because you sort of think about the situation, you reappraise it, and so when you actually get into the real do-or-die situation, they're less likely to consume those important brain resources.
Because you've emptied yourself of them? Is that?
You've essentially emptied them onto the paper.
Okay.
There's a lot of work in clinical psychology and a lot of other disciplines showing that getting people to journal when they've had a stressful event in their life helps them cope with the situation. And we're turning that around a little bit and saying, hey, writing about that event beforehand, all your worries about that event, essentially helps you cope with whatever is going to come your way, the unknown. It helps you reappraise the situation. You decide maybe it's just not as bad. And then when you're in the actual moment, those worries are less likely to pop up and distract you.
That is fascinating. Okay, wow. Okay, I happen to have a child who will be taking the SAT shortly. So let's say you have and there are many people out there listening, your kids taking the SAT. And by the way, out there, if your kid is not taking the SAT, make them take the SAT. Now, my little comment. Okay, and of course, I want my child, she wants to perform at her best. What tips, tools, strategies might you have for those who are looking forward and say, you know what, I want to perform at my best on my SAT because a lot rides on that. I mean, the schooling, your career, there's a lot riding on that test. What tips do you have, or a tip?
So there are a number of tips I talk about in the book. The writing about your worries works just as well in a business environment as it does in a testing situation,
Okay.
so getting kids to write about that ahead of time. Another thing I talked about before is just taking lots and lots of practice tests. One important point to understand is that how we perform in practice or when it doesn't count is almost like a different skill than what we have to do on game day. Taking an SAT in your bedroom with no one watching, with no one timing you, is like a different test than taking it in the real classroom with everyone around you when you know everything's on the line. And one thing that is really important to do is to get kids used to that testing environment. Because essentially, if you can get used to some of the pressure, even a mild level of stress, then when you're in the actual testing day, it doesn't seem as overwhelming. So when kids take classes like Princeton Review or Kaplan, for example, sure, these classes give you tricks of the trade, but one thing they do is kids over and over and over again take real timed practice tests. And this helps people essentially simulate a little bit of the stress they're going to feel, just a little bit, but it's enough to help kids on testing day. The Army does it. They have soldiers practice in simulated environments. The FBI does it. People try and do it in sports training. And it's this idea about closing the gap between training and competition. The closer you can practice to what's really going to happen, the more confident, the more prepared you're going to feel for that big 3-hour period.
You know, I must tell you, I'm as you talk about this, I'm flashing back on my time as an athlete at West Point, in the Army, and in the corporate environment. And you're right. I remember breaking down my rifle in the dark while they had, like, tear gas and all around us and loud noises and lights flashing, all this stuff that would throw us off. And they would say then, this is to prepare you for when it's real. And,
exactly.
Yeah, and what I hear you saying is that there actually is, now with your research, there is factual basis for that approach.
Yes, getting people used to, the good thing is that our brains are good learners. So if we can even adapt to a mild level of stress, you're never going to mimic what you're really going to feel in the do or die situation. But even adapting to a mild level of stress in what you do can be really beneficial. So if you are a student who plays the violin and you're worried about playing in front of an audience, videotaping yourself while you're playing or playing to a couple people gets you ready for that real situation when all eyes are on you. Or if you have to give a speech, pitching to a client, pitching to a couple of your colleagues, even though it's not so stressful, just having them there and judging you will get you used to performing when the lights are bright. Even things like making a fool out of yourself at an acting class, or just learning how to perform, to talk when people are watching you, will help with everything from that speech to giving a toast at a wedding.
Quick break here. Let's say you have a business. Say you want to perform well in your sport. Let's say that you have a speech coming up. Let's say that you are going to be interviewing for a job, whatever. Listen carefully to today's interview. Take notes, and then take action with what you learn. If you just take action with what you learn from today's interview, you can significantly upsurge, upshift, uplevel your performance in that interview, while playing your sport, in your job, whatever it is you do, within your relationships. it can be done. Listen to what we talk about today and take action. Let me see if I can flip this a little bit. Since you're a professor at the University of Chicago and you're up there, you, of course, are familiar with Michael Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, I used to say, when he would play, when the game was on the line, so let's say it was the final game of the playoffs, it was for all the marbles, you knew Michael Jordan was somebody going to get the ball and take the shot.
Right.
You knew, everyone knew it, yet he still managed to get the ball and take the shot most of the time, and his opponents managed to not stop him. Let me flip this. What is it in the opponent's mind that is stopping him from getting the ball? You know what I'm saying? It's everyone knows he's going to take the shot. You know it. You don't want him to take the shot. Bad things, man. Don't let him take a shot. Yet he most of the time managed to get his hands on the ball and actually get off a shot. And I always wondered, what is it about the people who didn't stop him? Now I'll shut up and let you answer.
Every time Michael Jordan got to take that shot, he practiced under stress. He got a little bit more confidence performing well in that situation. And unfortunately, his opponents probably didn't have that much practice dealing with that last second having to defend against Michael Jordan, maybe once every several games.
Okay.
But so they were performing in a pretty novel situation compared to what Jordan was performing in.
Okay.
And the pressure's on them, too, to stop the shot, right?
Yeah.
But there's something else that happens in these situations. If you know people have expectations about how you should perform, so as you just said, everyone expected Jordan to get the ball and make the shot.
Mm-hmm.
So the defense, they know that people have these expectations that they're going to fail. Just being aware of those expectations can be enough to mess you up. Either you worry about what's going to happen or you even try and deconstruct your own performance. You think too much about things that should just run on autopilot, and that can take you off your A game. And this doesn't just happen in sports. It happens in all sorts of situations, and not just in aspects of games where people might have expectations for you to fail. As it happens, there are expectations in society for how people will perform because of their membership in an ethnic group, or because of their gender, or because of their race.
Region of the country, those sorts of things, right?
Yeah, and that has a really big effect. So work in the book I talk about has shown that, for example, having women check off their gender before they take a math test leads to worse performance than if they didn't check off their gender. And you don't see these same effects for men. And the idea is that women, when they check off their gender, become aware of stereotypes about gender and math, the stereotype that girls just aren't good at math. And even if they don't believe it, just being aware that that expectation is out there leads to worse performance than you'd see if they just didn't check off their gender. Another place you see this is with African Americans. High-achieving African Americans, so African American students at Stanford, for example, there's a number of studies I talk about in the book showing that they score just as well as white students when race is not made salient, when they put all their demographic information at the end of the test. But when they have to check off their race at the beginning of the test, they actually perform worse than white students. And one of the ideas is that just being made aware of this stereotype, that it's out there, essentially creates a level of pressure that leads people to perform below their ability.
Wow. Now, okay, never afraid to traipse into other areas. What about for those Americans who are Asian Americans or whatever? Have you found any learnings of that in the relative performance, whatever it may be, as you just laid out for African Americans?
Right. So it turns out that positive stereotypes can be a benefit. So there's work I talk about in the book really showing how subtle these things are. If you're an Asian woman and you have an Asian woman focus on the fact that she's Asian, she'll do better on a math test. But if you have her focus on the fact that she's a woman, she does worse. So these very subtle effects change how the brain is functioning to support performance. And knowing this is the key then to bringing the right tools to the table to make sure that you perform at your best. Wow.
The book is Choke, What the Secrets of the Brain Reveal About Getting It Right When You Have to. My guest, Dr. Sian Beilock. I have one more area to jump on here because I deal with a lot of clients. What about in the field of, or in the area of parenting and being a good parent? We don't have to. You're a big-time researcher. You're the real deal. But we don't have to be big-time researchers to know the impact single-parent households, single mothers, two-parent households, parenting in general. Do you have any learnings about performing as a parent under those kind of umbrellas of?
Yeah, I talk. We always think about these really sort of typical stressful situations and pressure situations, whether it's, performing at the Olympics or on the job interview. But it turns out that we encounter stressful situations all the time that can lead us to choke. And parenting is a nice example when, you're under the gun, you feel like all your resources are depleted, you're not able to talk or deal with your kid. This is a stressful situation where sometimes you're not able to perform at your best. And it's been shown that when parents feel really stressed by the environment and what's around them, they don't have as much of this brain power, this cognitive horsepower to make the right and rational decisions, to not react as emotionally to their children as they should. And so I talk a lot in the book about techniques that can be used, and I do refer in some situations to parenting specifically to get rid of some of the stress in the moment to help parents make the best choices. So one thing I talk about is pausing the choke. So this is the idea that if we are going with all brain cylinders in essence on empty, if we are just banging our head against the wall to solve a problem or deal with a child and it's not working, one of the best things to do is to just step away for a second. Maybe you can't step away from the kid that you're working with, but you can change the subject. You can go on to something different. If you're arguing with your teenager about curfews or grades or anything like that, changing the topic for a second, giving everyone time to regroup actually lets the brain regroup too. And when you do that, when you come back to a problem, then maybe you can see it from a new way. You see a new insight or something you didn't notice before. You might have an aha moment. So just charging ahead with your head down is not always the best thing. Stepping aside, regrouping, catching your breath can be really important for making sure that you're making the most sane decisions, not driven by some sort of emotional reaction, for example.
Well, okay. With that said, I've got one more. I always personalize my the interviews I have with experts such as yourself. At the end, I personalize it because I'm going to put myself in the petri dish and let you deal with me now. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. It's this way, under the microscope, rather. One of my goals, one of my major life goals, is to help others achieve their dreams, to live their best life, to take themselves to their highest possibility, to be that giant inside of them. Okay, I don't want to fail at that. I don't want to choke at that. I don't want to flub that going forward. What advice would you give me so that I perform at my best to give people my gift to allow them to reach their goals? What should I do?
So there's a number of things that I would talk about that I think could be really helpful in this situation. One is to focus on the positive, focus on your credentials and what you've done in the past, right? So when you walk into a new meeting, whether you're feeling like you're not giving them the best advice or whether you're feeling like this is a difficult problem, rather than focusing on that or just letting your mind wander freely, actually actively focusing on past accomplishments. There's research showing that getting people to think about their credentials can be really important in that situation because it gives you that extra oomph, that extra confidence to move forward. That's one example. There's a lot of other techniques that I talk about in the book, everything ranging from essentially writing down as you're solving a problem all the different aspects of what's going on, so it's all there in front of you. You have like an external memory source, so you're not having to hold everything in your head, right? So helping yourself think more clearly. All these sorts of things can be really beneficial. Little things can be really beneficial to help people perform at their best. And one other that I think is really relevant here, when talking to people and when talking to them about how they might perform their best, maybe it's in an interview, for example, or in a meeting, knowing a little bit about brain science can be so helpful for making small, minor tweaks to what you do to help people get their point across or feel the best about themselves. So in the book, for example, I talk about work showing that getting your take-home point across early is very important for ensuring that people actually remember it later. And the idea is that when you give a take-home point early, it actually gives people a schema or a context within which to encode everything else, to remember everything else. If you don't give a take-home point away until the end, then people are hearing all this information, but they don't know how to organize it. So giving your clients an organizational scheme, telling them up front what you think are important aspects for them to work at, allows them then to tag or to link everything else you say to that important point. It'll make more sense to them. Hopefully it'll make more sense to you. And in the end, I think you'll have a more successful client.
Dr. Beilock, genius. You know what's great about you, too? is that you actually sound into it. You know, a lot of professionals, a lot of experts, they're so clinical. There's, you go to the doctor and he's telling you need to have your leg replaced or something dramatic, and it sounds like he's reading from a book and it's stale. The rise and fall of your voice tells me you really care that people use this information. I can feel it coming across, and I want to thank you for sharing the book and your gift with us. Thank you so much for this.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
No problem. The book is Choke, What the Secrets of the Brain Reveal About Getting It Right When You Have to, by Dr. Sian Beilock. She's University of Chicago professor. So if you have kids, they're going to go there, tell them to look up Dr. Beilock. I'm sure she'll help them do better, perform better. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Beilock, thanks for your time. Well, my friends, I want to thank you for joining me today during my interview with experts. Today's guest was Dr. Sian Beilock, author of the book Choke. What a great title, right? Choke, C-H-O-K-E. What the Secrets of the Brain Reveal About Getting It Right When You Have to. You can find the book anywhere fine books are sold, online, offline. Fantastic book. What I want you to know is that the key to getting great information, to really making it make a difference in your life, is taking action. So I want to strongly encourage you to take action with what you've learned today in your life right now. And if you do, you will see the results almost immediately. Bye-bye now. Remember this, you do deserve to live a great life. Believe, think, act, win. Enjoy life. This has been Daryl Mobley. Thanks for listening to us at SuccessMojo.com, the best, most affordable life coaching that is guaranteed to help you live a better life, make more money, have more fun, experience more fulfilling relationships, get work-life balance, plus a whole lot more. SuccessMojo.com.